Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 251 of CryptoBiography, and it is part 17 of the Isle of Bronze. And here we go. He climbed back down. He stood back some 20 paces from the bronze gate and watched it shake as the ram kept hitting it. The Limos defenders continued to pour down their missiles upon the enemy, but they did not stop the ram, and he knew that they never would. Every few seconds the ram struck the bronze gate with a deafening boom. Shugo came over and stood next to him. Nasramin looked at his eldest son. He couldn't bring himself to say anything to him, how proud he was, but Shugo seemed to understand. He nodded back at his father and then turned his face to the bronze gate. Nasramin allowed himself one long look at his son's profile, then himself turned to the gate. The gate boomed from another strike of the ram. Nasramin thought back. He knew what was most likely to happen. Once he was dead, they would make sure Shugo, fighting alongside him, would be dead too, or at the least captured. All hints of their culture would be expunged. He doubted that Linus would survive such a purge, and with Asasi so close to him, he might die as well. That left his beloved Mawaya, their daughter Hama, and Hama's love, and his protected guest, Theodora. Protected was a mere irony now. He hoped the three of them might find a way to hide, or better, get off the island, but one of the things that had always kept their island safe was that the main harbor was really the only good place to bring a ship in. Even if they got away, where would they go? If their island were taken over by the Assyrians, they would have no power or wealth to offer anyone. Perhaps one of the powers they had sent emissaries to would take pity on them. He hoped so, but it all seemed so unlikely. And while losing his family tore at him, in many ways he was most deeply disappointed that all the efforts he had made to make life better for his people, all the changes he had started to put into place and hoped to finish, all were gone. And if history had taught him anything, it was that their story would vanish. They would be a mere name in a list of Assyrian victories. Surely the presence of the Theban chess and their attack shortly after meant that Thebes had been reassailed and taken over. The historians would note, at most, that after destroying the Hellenic city-state, Assyria, for reasons unknown, took the time to conquer the tiny island of Limos. Despite their long history, he knew that their story was little understood by others. At best, they were known for exporting bronze and tin, and for being independent. Some safety that had given them. Long centuries of selling bronze had made the island wealthy. The kings of Limos had spread that wealth all over the island in many ways. But that would all be scooped up by the Assyrian king or emperor or whatever he called himself, and hoarded in some vault. Their harbor would be burned, their bronze gate torn down and probably melted down, their palace looted. Their history, which wasn't widely known nor widely told outside their island, would be wiped away. He did not know what they would do with his body, parade it around their own land as decoration, post it on a square here in Limos as a warning, or dump it in the deepest seas so that his resting place could never be found, his memory lost even more. He didn't know if anything he did now could help Mawaya and the girls escape. Who knew but his continuing to fight might raise their ire and make them hunt his wife down. The gate boomed again. This time it actually moved a little, which shouldn't happen. The bronze gate was damaged. He too drew his sword. He looked around and called to a man to bring him a shield. In moments he had one in his left hand. They brought one for Shugo as well. Father and son waited for the ending. The gate boomed again. This time it cracked open slightly. Nasramin heard a roar from the Assyrians on the other side, seeing their progress. But the bronze gate was not to be smashed open like an eggshell. The defenders, too, knowing the stakes, roared and redoubled their efforts to drive off the enemy. Another barrel of hot water had been prepared and dumped on the enemy ram. It splashed everywhere, and some screams came from the Assyrian warriors. But it wasn't enough. There was another boom, and Nasramin could see the tip of the ram, which had smashed through the bronze plating and was pushing the gates apart. He had always meant, when he was an old king living his last years, to do a major history so that their story would be known. In his mind, he had even had copies made and sent to other powers so that their story would be known everywhere. But that project had never even been started. Now his story would be nothing. Either they would bury even his name, or use his name as a mere marker of their power and prestige. King Nasramin of Limos, destroyed by our mighty armada. Mawaya, Shugo, Hama, Asasi, all would be lost, forgotten. The changes he had made to his island ignored. Their culture and their religion demeaned. Strange, he thought. Even though he didn't believe in their religion, he still wanted it remembered. Mercelia and Linus, both would be forgotten as well. The bronze gate boomed again, but this time with a snapping sound. The gate cracked open, sliding toward Nasramin, though it had been designed not to. The bronze gate was broken. The enemy were there. Nasramin roared, raised his sword and shield, and charged. Around and behind him his fellow Limosians also yelled their battle cries. He was already at the gate, and he could tell his son was directly behind him. The Assyrians were already piling out of the ram, and others were trying to come around to prepare for an assault on the gate. But they were not ready, or not ready in time, for a king and his guard to charge them through the gate. He crashed into them, screaming his hate, even as they yelled unknown words back at him, and swung his sword over and over, and though his beautiful bronze sword might have trouble against the enemy's plain iron, he had been trained to fight since his youth, and found joints and open points, and many Assyrians died screaming under his blade. His son fought beside him, as did his guards. Together they pushed through. The defenders on top of the walls, being careful not to harm their king or his men, ceased throwing their rocks and firing their arrows, and came down to line up behind the king's guard. But the Assyrians were so many. They cut down man after man, row after row, but there were thousands of them. They were never really outnumbered due to the confines of the path, but there were always enemies in front of them. They fought down to the first curve in the path, and still the Assyrians had no end. The sweat poured off of him. Thoughts of Mawaya and his children drove him on, but he was losing his energy. A spear drove through his armor, its iron tip driving into his side. He spat blood, but kept fighting. But it happened again, this time a spear breaking through the armor on his thigh. He was driven to his knees. His men tried to gather round him, protect him, but the Assyrians were heartened by his injuries and pressed forward. In his last moments he thought of Mawaya and hoped she could get the girls safely away, but he knew that it was all lost, all gone, and that he had failed his people and his family. And that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I understand the ending is, unpleasant. If you have comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter, and thank you for listening. Words and music, copyright 2022, CryptoBiography, LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.